When I first met Sarah, I felt like the universe had finally aligned. She was everything I had ever wanted in a partner: intelligent, beautiful, confident, and so full of life. Our connection was immediate, and we quickly became inseparable. Everyone around us saw the perfect couple, two people who couldn't seem to be without each other. After dating for 2 years, I proposed, and she said yes without hesitation. I couldn't imagine my life without her. We had a small but beautiful wedding, surrounded by friends and family. I thought I had everything. A successful career as an architect, a beautiful wife, and a future that seemed limitless. I was convinced that everything would fall into place. I was wrong. The first few months of our marriage were everything I had hoped for. We traveled together, made memories, and settled into a routine that felt comfortable. Sarah was supportive of my work, and I admired her passion for her career as a marketing manager. I thought we were both thriving in our respective fields. We were both busy, but we made time for each other. Or so I thought. But, as time went on, I began to notice a subtle shift in Sarah. It was small at first, just little things like her coming home later from work or spending more time on her phone. Her laughter, once so spontaneous and bright, seemed forced. The spark that had once existed between us started to fade, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened. I convinced myself it was the stress of adjusting to married life and our demanding careers. Everyone goes through rough patches, right? One night, it hit me. I had stayed late at work, finishing up a project that was due, and when I got home, I expected Sarah to be there, just like she always was. Instead, the apartment was empty. I glanced at my phone, expecting to see a text or a missed call, but there was nothing. I waited for a while, assuming she was running errands or meeting a friend. But when an hour passed, I began to feel uneasy. I tried to call her. No answer. I sent a text. "Hey, babe. Are you okay? I'm home." Nothing. I didn't want to overreact, but something didn't feel right. I paced around the apartment, glancing at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Where was she? I considered calling her best friend, Rachel, to see if Sarah had gone to visit her. But I decided against it, not wanting to sound paranoid. Finally, at around 1 a.m., Sarah walked through the door. She didn't seem alarmed or apologetic, just tired. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said, dropping her bag on the couch. "I was caught up with work." "No problem," I said, but my voice betrayed my feelings. I was frustrated. And confused. She smiled faintly and disappeared into the bedroom to change. I tried to shake off the feeling gnawing at me, but it lingered. My mind started racing. What if she's been lying to me? What if something was going on that I didn't know about? But I didn't confront her. I had no proof, just an unsettling feeling. The next morning, she seemed perfectly fine. She kissed me goodbye as I left for work, and everything appeared normal. But as I sat at my desk that day, I couldn't stop thinking about the previous night. The tension, the unexplained absences, the small signs I had been ignoring. I tried to push it all out of my mind, but it kept coming back. I knew something wasn't right. Later that week, I came home early, eager to surprise Sarah with a quiet evening at home. I grabbed takeout from our favorite Italian place and thought we could relax. When I entered the apartment, I was greeted by silence. The lights were dim, and Sarah wasn't there. Her car was parked outside, though. Something felt off. I set the food on the kitchen counter and sat down, waiting. As the minutes stretched on, my unease grew. I tried calling her again, no answer. My fingers trembled as I dialed her number once more. And then, without thinking, I heard it. The faint sound of someone talking from the other room. My heart rate quickened as I walked toward the bedroom, unsure of what I was about to find. I stood by the door, and I heard her voice, but this time, it wasn't alone. She was speaking to someone else. "You're playing with fire, you know that?" A man's voice. Low, confident, with a hint of amusement. "Maybe I like the thrill," Sarah replied, her voice light but laced with something unfamiliar, something I couldn't quite place. I froze. My mind tried to make sense of what I was hearing. Fire? Thrill? Who was she talking to? And why was she speaking like that? "You're really going to marry him?" the voice continued, almost teasing. Sarah's laugh followed, soft, but something about it made my stomach turn. "I don't know. It's complicated. Jake and we've been together forever. But with you, it feels different. Alive." Alive? I couldn't breathe. My body stiffened as I tried to process what I was hearing. I took a step back, the floor creaking under my weight. My heart was pounding in my chest. Alive? What did that mean? Who was this man? What was going on? I turned around slowly, my legs unsteady as I walked out of the apartment. I didn't know what to do next. I needed to think. I needed to understand what was happening. The weight of what I had just heard crashed over me like a wave. Everything in my life, everything I thought I knew, suddenly felt like it was crumbling. As I sat in my car outside the building, I didn't know what I was more afraid of, the truth or the fact that I had never seen this coming. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus on anything, work, meals, even sleep. My mind kept replaying Sarah's words, her laugh, the unfamiliar voice of the man who had been with her. I tried to convince myself that I had misunderstood. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was some kind of joke. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was wrong, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went through the motions, but my every thought was consumed by that conversation. I couldn't bring myself to confront Sarah directly, not yet. I needed more answers. But how could I even ask? What would I say? How could I accuse her without sounding paranoid or crazy? I spent my days working, but every second away from the office felt like a countdown, an impending explosion waiting to happen. The next evening, after another long day at work, I returned home early, hoping to catch her before she had the chance to slip away again. My stomach twisted with anxiety as I entered the apartment, half expecting to find her in the middle of some elaborate lie. But when I opened the door, it was eerily quiet. No sign of Sarah. Her keys were on the kitchen counter, her jacket draped over the chair like usual. Yet, she wasn't there. I walked further into the apartment, my mind spinning. Was she out with friends? Was she still at work? My heart dropped at the thought of what might be happening behind my back. I tried calling her again, but as usual, no answer. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the phone screen, hoping for a response. Nothing. My thoughts spiraled, and with every unanswered call, I felt myself sinking deeper into a pit of unease and confusion. I walked to the window, staring out at the city lights below, wishing for some kind of clarity, something to ease the weight pressing down on my chest. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps outside the door. My breath caught in my throat. Was she back? I rushed to the door, practically yanking it open. It was Sarah, standing there in the hallway, her eyes wide with surprise. "Jake, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice too casual, too practiced. "I came home early," I said, trying to sound calm. My heart was racing. "Where have you been?" "I've been trying to reach you." She hesitated for a moment, a flicker of something in her eyes that I couldn't place. Then she smiled, a little too brightly. "Just out with a friend," she said, brushing past me into the apartment. "I didn't think you'd be home. I didn't mean to worry you." Her words felt like a thin veil over something much darker. I nodded, trying to suppress the rising wave of suspicion. "Who were you with?" I asked, my voice coming out colder than I intended. She paused as she set down her purse, her fingers lightly touching the strap. Just a friend from work. You know, things have been so hectic lately with everything going on. I nodded again, but I didn't believe her. There was something off about the way she said it, something too rehearsed. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she avoided my gaze, the way she shifted uncomfortably under the weight of my silence. You seem distracted, I said, my voice tight. What's going on, Sarah? You're not yourself. She gave me a weak smile and shook her head. Nothing's wrong, Jake. Just stressed, you know. We'll be fine. I watched her closely, trying to catch even the smallest hint of truth in her expression. But there was nothing, just the same smile, the same mask she had been wearing for weeks now. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her. But that voice, the voice I had overheard, those words, haunted me. She kissed me on the cheek as she passed, heading toward the bedroom. I'm going to get changed, she said, the door closing softly behind her. I stood there in the living room, feeling more alone than I ever had before. My mind raced through every possible scenario, but none of them made sense. Sarah had always been so open, so warm. We had shared everything, or so I thought. I had to know the truth, but I wasn't sure how much more I could handle. As the night wore on, I sat on the couch, the dim light from the kitchen casting long shadows across the room. I tried to distract myself, checking emails, reading the news, anything to keep my mind from racing. But my thoughts kept circling back to Sarah. A sudden noise from the bedroom interrupted my thoughts. It was the sound of a phone buzzing. I froze. The familiar vibration. I had heard it so many times before. I waited, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. The buzzing continued, each vibration like a hammer hitting my skull. I stood up, my body moving on instinct, my breath shallow. I knew I should leave it alone. I knew it wasn't right to invade her privacy, but I couldn't help myself. My feet moved before I could stop them, carrying me toward the bedroom. There, on her nightstand, sat her phone. It buzzed again, the screen lighting up. I stared at it for a moment, heart pounding in my chest. Should I check it? Should I give in to the temptation? I picked it up. The screen flashed brightly in the dim room, and I saw the message. My stomach dropped, my blood ran cold. Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll be at the usual spot. The message was from someone named Matt. I had never heard of him before. The name sent a chill down my spine. The feeling that had been building in my gut, that suspicion, suddenly bloomed into a terrifying reality. I put the phone down, my hands shaking. I needed to confront her. I had to know. But when Sarah came out of the bedroom moments later, her smile was back, warm, familiar, and completely false. I couldn't shake the feeling that the person standing in front of me wasn't the woman I had married. "Jake?" she asked, her voice soft. "Are you okay?" I nodded, trying to appear calm, but inside I was seething. I didn't know what to say, how to say it. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew what I had to do. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The lies. The distance. The secrecy. The truth was right in front of me, and I wasn't going to run from it any longer. The next morning, I could hardly look Sarah in the eye. Her presence in the apartment, the way she moved so casually through the kitchen as if everything was perfectly fine, made me feel sick. The previous night's discoveries weighed heavily on me, my thoughts spinning relentlessly. That text. Matt. The usual spot. It was all too much to ignore. I couldn't pretend anymore. I forced myself through another awkward breakfast, my fork scraping against my plate more harshly than necessary. I tried to speak, tried to ask questions, but everything came out wrong. The words were there, but the trust, the sense of peace I once had with her, was gone. Sarah, oblivious to the storm swirling in my chest, continued on like nothing had changed. She told me about an upcoming event at the boutique, about how she was considering expanding her shop, about the latest design ideas she had. Her voice was light, almost cheerful. But to me, it sounded distant, like a radio playing in the background while my thoughts raged on. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't just sit here and let it eat at me. The truth was out there, hanging between us like a thick fog, and I needed to know exactly what was going on. "So, who's Matt?" I asked casually, as if it didn't rattle me to the core. My words were calm, but my eyes never left hers. The sudden change in her expression was instantaneous. She froze for a fraction of a second before giving me a tight smile. "Matt?" she asked, her voice just a little too high-pitched. "Matt's just a friend from work, Jake. You know that." I narrowed my eyes, unconvinced. She was lying. I could feel it. The hesitation in her voice. The way her eyes flickered toward the window, avoiding my gaze. "Then why the text last night?" "Can't wait to see you tonight." "What does that mean, Sarah?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. She took a step back, her face pale. "Jake, I don't know what you're talking about. You're reading too much into things. It's just a professional relationship." I stood up, unable to sit any longer. I could feel the anger and hurt building up, but I didn't want to lose control. "Not yet. It's hard to take you seriously when I know what I saw." For a moment, there was silence. She stood there, her lips pressed tightly together. Her fingers twitched nervously at her side, but she didn't speak. "I'm not stupid, Sarah. I know when something's off," I said, my voice a little firmer now. "And this is off. Something's going on, and you're not being honest with me." Her shoulders slumped, and her eyes glistened with something I couldn't identify, guilt, fear, or maybe something darker. But whatever it was, it made my heart drop. She wasn't the woman I had married. The woman I loved. "I don't know what you want me to say," Sarah finally muttered, her voice breaking slightly. She turned away from me, staring out of the window with a vacant expression. "Things have changed, Jake. Things aren't the way they used to be." The words were like a slap. Things have changed. My mind raced. I wasn't sure if it was the pain of hearing it or the crushing realization that she was right. Things had changed. And I hadn't seen it coming. "Don't tell me this is about the wedding, Sarah," I said, my tone harsh. "We've been planning this for months, and now you just decide it doesn't matter?" She shook her head slowly, but her voice trembled. "It's not just about the wedding. It's everything. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like I've lost myself in all of this. In us." The words stung, but they also felt like an admission of guilt. She wasn't just unsure of her feelings, she was distancing herself. The more she spoke, the more I realized this wasn't just about an affair. This was something deeper, something that had been building for months, maybe even years. The cracks in our relationship had always been there, but I had been too blind to see them. "Have you been seeing him, Matt, behind my back?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She winced at the question, her shoulders tightening. "Jake, I never meant for it to go this far. It wasn't supposed to happen. But I can't help it anymore." I swallowed hard. I had been holding on to the idea of us for so long, trying to ignore the growing distance between us. But now, it was all crashing down. I could feel the weight of everything I had worked so hard for, the love, the future we had planned, shifting into something I didn't recognize. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jake," she said quietly, but I could see the tears welling in her eyes. It was like she wasn't even seeing me anymore. "Then why didn't you just tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking. The anger was still there, but it was slowly being replaced by something else, something far worse. Betrayal. I couldn't, Jake. I couldn't bear to hurt you. Her voice faltered. But I wasn't happy. Not like you thought. Her confession felt like a punch to the gut. Every emotion I had buried, every doubt I had pushed away, was flooding back now. The future we had planned together felt like a lie, a mirage that I had been chasing all along. Who are you, Sarah? I whispered, my heart aching. Who have you become? Her silence was all I needed to hear. There was no answer. There was no justification. She had already checked out, and I was left standing there, shattered, with no one to pick up the pieces. I walked out of the apartment, the door slamming behind me. The cool air hit me like a slap, but it did nothing to numb the ache in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there. Not now. Not with her. As I walked aimlessly through the streets, my mind was consumed with the aftermath of what had just happened. But one thought kept looping in my head: she had chosen him. And no matter how hard I tried to deny it, I knew I couldn't undo it. I had been in love with a woman who had stopped loving me long before I realized it. And now, I had to figure out who I was without her. I spent the next few days in a haze of disbelief. The apartment, which once felt like home, now felt cold and foreign. Every corner seemed to echo with the remnants of the life Sarah and I had built together, but there was no joy left. No warmth. I went through the motions, but nothing felt real. My mind was a battlefield, my emotions torn between anger, sorrow, and a deep, aching sense of betrayal. Work was the only distraction, though it was far from enough. At the marketing firm, I buried myself in projects and meetings, pushing my feelings aside. But every time I looked at my phone or checked my messages, I saw her name pop up. Sarah. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to erase her from my life, but deep down, I knew I couldn't. I needed answers. I needed to know why she did it. And, more than that, I needed to know if it was truly over. One evening, after a long day at the office, I returned home to find the door unlocked. My heart skipped a beat. I had told her, that I needed space. That I needed time. But there she was, standing in the living room as if nothing had changed. Jake, she started, her voice shaking. I held up a hand to stop her. Don't apologize. You already did that. My words were cold, cutting through the silence between us. She looked hurt, but I couldn't find it in me to care. Jake, please let me explain. I never meant for things to get this far. Her voice trembled as she took a step closer. I made a mistake. But Matt. It was a mistake. I'm still in love with you. I couldn't stop the laugh that escaped me. It was bitter, a mix of disbelief and frustration. Love? Is that what this is? You love me, but you've been sleeping with him behind my back. Do you think that's what love is? She recoiled as if I had slapped her. It's not like that, Jake. You don't understand. Then make me understand, Sarah. I shouted, my voice rising with the anger that had been building inside me. Because right now, all I understand is that I've been living with a stranger. You're not the woman I married, and I don't even know who you are anymore. Her face crumpled as she fought back tears. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted it to go this far. But I couldn't help myself. I didn't know how to respond to that. My heart was a mess of confusion, anger, and hurt, and nothing she said could fix it. I turned away from her, needing space, needing air. I'm done, Sarah, I said, my voice quieter now, but filled with finality. I can't do this anymore. I need to move on. She looked like she was about to say something, but I didn't wait to hear it. I walked out of the apartment, the door slamming behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. Days turned into weeks. I moved out of the apartment, finding a small place to stay for the time being. I told myself that I was doing the right thing. That moving away from Sarah would help me heal, give me the space I needed to find myself again. But the more time passed, the more I realized I wasn't healing at all. I was still drowning in my own emotions, suffocating under the weight of the truth. I saw her sometimes, at work, at the coffee shop, walking down the street, but I kept my distance. I couldn't look her in the eye. Not after everything that had happened. And then, one evening, as I was sitting alone in my apartment, trying to make sense of it all, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Sarah. I hesitated, but something in me urged me to answer. "Jake," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "I need to tell you something. Something important." I closed my eyes, bracing myself for another round of excuses, but something in her voice made me listen. "I know I've hurt you," she continued. "And I know I can't fix what I've done. But you deserve to know the truth." I waited in silence, my heart pounding in my chest. "The truth?" I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. "What truth?" I was never with Matt," she said, her voice breaking. "It wasn't him. It was someone else. A different man. Someone you don't know." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about?" I asked, disbelief creeping into my voice. "You're telling me that all this time, you've been seeing someone else?" She paused, and I could hear her choking back sobs. "I never meant for it to happen. But it did. And I need you to understand that. I never loved Matt. I was using him to cover up what was really happening." My mind raced, trying to piece together what she was saying. It felt like I was drowning in a sea of lies, unable to keep my head above water. "Who is he, Sarah? Who is the man you were really with?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, I heard the sound of someone in the background. A voice. A man's voice. "Sarah?" I asked, my heart racing. The voice spoke again, but it wasn't Sarah's. It was a familiar voice. The voice of my best friend. My best friend, Matt. "Jake, listen," Matt said, his voice low. "This wasn't what you think." I ended the call, my hands shaking. My world spun. Matt. I had trusted him. I had called him my friend. And now, he was the one who had been with Sarah all along. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a complete annihilation of everything I thought I knew. The weeks after the truth came out were the hardest of my life. I couldn't trust anyone. Not Sarah. Not Matt. It felt like the people I had trusted most had ripped apart the life I had built. The pain was unbearable at times. But amidst all the chaos, I realized something. I had been living for other people. I had been so focused on keeping Sarah happy, keeping Matt close, that I had lost myself along the way. But now, I had to find a way to move on. I spent a lot of time reflecting on what had happened. On what I had allowed to happen. I realized that I didn't want to be defined by Sarah's betrayal. I didn't want to be consumed by the anger and the hurt. One day, as I sat in the park, watching the sunset, I finally made a decision. I was going to rebuild my life. I was going to learn how to trust again, not just others, but myself. I wasn't going to let Sarah and Matt take everything from me. They had destroyed my trust, my peace, but they couldn't take away who I was. I wasn't just Jake, the guy who had been cheated on. I was Jake, and I was going to be okay. In time, I would heal. It would take work, and it wouldn't be easy, but I knew one thing for sure, would never let someone define my worth again. And as I walked away from the past, I finally felt a sense of peace settle in. The pain was still there, but it was manageable now. I was free. A year later, I ran into Sarah. It was at a charity event, of all places. She was standing there, looking as beautiful as ever, but there was something different about her. She seemed lost. Vulnerable, even. She looked at me, her eyes wide, but this time, there was no anger in my chest. No resentment. "I'm sorry, Jake," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "I never meant to hurt you. I was wrong, and I've never been more sorry in my life." I nodded. "I know, Sarah. I know." And for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger, no bitterness, just a quiet acceptance. As we parted ways, I realized that, in a strange way, I had forgiven her. Not for her sake, but for mine. Because sometimes, the hardest thing to do is to let go, and to finally move on.